and we are back with the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms Episode 1 review. Now, I'm going to be doing this video a little differently from how I did Thrones and House of the Dragon. I'll be going into my thoughts on the episode, plus we'll be seeing what George R.R. Martin had to say about that one opening scene, and most importantly, we'll see what you guys in the audience had to say about it. I collected some of your comments, tweets, and posts on what you liked and disliked about the premiere, and we'll be discussing that here. But as always, before we begin, please be sure to click that like and subscribe button and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I may feature it in the future episode. Let's get into it. First and foremost, what did I think of this premiere? I thought it was pretty good. It was fine. For a premiere episode, it didn't really rile me up too much for the next one, but I will be tuning in anyways because I quite enjoyed the characters, which really carried this neat little story along. Although I will say I won't be in a rush to watch it the moment it comes out on Sunday, and I think this is what sets the show apart from the previous ones. Unlike Game of Thrones, which grabbed you the moment Jaime tossed a child out from a window, or with House of the Dragon and the revelation of the Targaryens knowing about the White Walker threat, this show doesn't seem to be in a rush to get into the meat and potatoes of what the series is about, and as such, I don't feel like I need to either. Keep in mind, I'm not telling you to drop it altogether. I'm just saying that you shouldn't worry too much on catching it on Sunday instead of Monday or Tuesday when you have time. The show is taking its time to get into everything, and it's okay if you do too. And yes, I know it's just the first episode and we should give it time to marinate and draw you in. Of course, I 100% agree with that. But I think what would have helped my motivation, as well as others, to come back the moment it drops would be if they released 2, maybe 3 episodes on the first day, because that's when everything really gets into it. HBO isn't new to these types of releases. They did it with Raised by Wolves years ago, and they can do it again. But they also need you to keep that subscription going for at least a month or two, so here we are. And even if the story in the first few episodes are basically a Hedge Knight simulator, what really got me the entire time was the characters. I know the showrunner wanted to tease that this is a grounded and gritty story. Sure, but what I felt were the strongest moments of the show were our secondary characters whenever they popped up. I absolutely loved Lionel Baratheon. He stole every scene he was in, and even Raymond Fossway was cool too. I loved his line about Dunk being half man, half giant, and even the random flashbacks of Sir Arlen were great. I didn't expect to get as many as we did, but hopefully it's something we'll see more going forward. Other than not releasing more than one episode on premiere, the only other issue I had was the poop humor in the opening moments. I know some people will chime in to say it's a stylistic choice and that it's a metaphor to distance itself from Thrones. Yeah. I'm just not a fan of it. Never was. Although this does seem to be something Ira Parker has a fetish for. He did something like this for House of the Dragon when he wrote some of those episodes, and I expect we'll see more of this later on in the season. I know people are going to say, well, George writes his characters like that sometimes, and well, that's true. We all know about Daenerys 10, the Dance with Dragons, sure, but George was confused by that scene too. According to a Hollywood Reporter article, his reaction is that, well, here's what he had to say. Not to say that my characters don't take shits, but I normally don't write about them at length. When I saw a rough cut, I wrote, what is this? Where did this come from? I don't know if we really need the shit, but showrunner Ira Parker liked it for whatever reason. Yeah, sure, why not? But overall, I quite enjoyed the episode, and I feel I need to reiterate this again for people who have a listening problem. I did like it. It was fine. But because it's such a low-stakes story that distanced itself so far from House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, and is not immediately connected to those stories, I'm not in a rush to come back the moment it drops. Hell, I wouldn't blame you if you decided to wait a few episodes to binge. I'd almost recommend you do that if it weren't for me doing a YouTube channel, because of course, I want you to come back here and watch this video. And so, with my thoughts out of the way, I was curious about what you guys had to say, and I went through the comments of my previous videos and picked a few to check out. Starting with Nixily, who says, I didn't even know this was coming out. HBO can't be that hyped about it. So, it's funny you say this. Again, if you didn't watch my non-spoiler review, which you should, I wasn't able to get screeners, but I do have a contact over at HBO who was able to hook me up. According to them, HBO execs weren't too sure about going all out for this show, so the marketing wasn't as big as it would have been for something like Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. But it could also be that you have ad block on and you don't normally subscribe to fantasy news on your social media page, so that could be it as well. DB Nevermind says, A Knight of the Nine Kingdoms? Come back to me after the last episode on February 22nd. We'll talk. Kieran Grant 1607 says, I've always claimed that they should start with Dunk's early years through his time with Sir Arlen. You can look this up. It makes sense to me. Lionel is stealing the show so far. I did think he would be bigger though. LOL. I disagree that we should have started with Dunk and Arlen's early years, but I can promise you that you will see some of that in a later episode. And I don't just mean a flashback. And yes, Lionel should have been bigger, though Dunk does mention that too, which I thought was funny. Nice little Easter egg nod there. I can also promise you that Lionel will appear in more episodes, and he's great in every single scene he's in, especially the final episode. Komodo Dojo says, review synopsis, for my non-spoiler review, not enough Valyrian steel daggers, too many poop jokes, 7.5. That fucking dagger. Look, I don't want to talk about it, okay? So, yeah. And finally, for our YouTube comments, BrookeEasy348 says, it does look like a lot of filler, which worries me seeing any of the creative changes / add-ons in the first episode. Happy to be pleasantly surprised, though. I can safely say that I would not mind more filler scenes, especially for characters that show up later to help. But how do I say this without spoiling it? Some of them do get an introduction, but it feels like most of that budget went into giving Lionel a lot of scenes. So characters like Beesbury or Riesling, they don't get too much of a thing to do, even though they should have. Though I will say those two do get their time to shine, but it's not much time, and I'll leave it at that. On Twitter, both Adam and Sanchin agree with me that the show should have released more than one episode on the premiere night, with the former fearing for the lack of excitement, though I will say episode 3 is when it really kicks off, and we'll see if the drop-off views aren't too bad by then. However, Jordan King disagrees with me that he felt the shit was crucial. He says here, generally not meant as a diss, but some folk really have not read the Canterbury Tales, or medieval literature generally. It's all piss and shit and kissing hairy bums in Chaucer. And the Dunk and Egg Tales are Martin's most overtly Chaucerian works by far. Hope I'm saying that right. The shit is justified. You know what, Jordan? You're not wrong. And I will say I'm exaggerating a little bit, just a tad. Because we will have this type of humor one more time in a later episode. But in my defense, even George was confused by it, and it seems like an Ira Parker thing to do, to just add it in there randomly. But you're not wrong. However, come back to me after episode 4. We'll talk about it. That Just Happened says, I thought it was mostly shit. Stop raping, sir, was the peak. After that, it just felt cartoonish. I haven't read The Hedge Knight in a while, but it felt a lot more grounded. This felt way too Marvel. I don't agree with you that it was bad. I will say that the series does need more comedy. House of the Dragon is just so dreary all the time that it becomes downright depressing, and I don't think Dunk acting like a lovable dork or Raymond cracking jokes is Marvel humor. Once upon a time, a show used to have light comedy and it wasn't connected to Marvel movies in any way, but that was also a time before complaining about Marvel movies wasn't as profitable on YouTube as it is now, so here we are. And last, Darius says, I was intrigued and entertained, but the ending was too abrupt. I read online that every episode's runtime is under 45 minutes. True. I'm concerned it may end up feeling rushed, though the novella was short, so perhaps it's the perfect length. You know what? I somewhat agree, and I'm also surprised he didn't put in more filler to space it out to get to 7 episodes, especially when you consider that 7 is the A Song of Ice and Fire main number. And honestly, this will be a debate, but it could have used more episodes to flesh out more of the characters. But if we're talking about page to screen, it's actually the right number of episodes. Ira Parker managed to fit it all in quite nicely. Though I will say, I felt that they excluded a few scenes that were very important to Dunk's story, and maybe a few others that should have been added in as well to flesh out some of the characters, but we'll save that complaint for another video. But guys, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, leave a like, comment, subscribe for the algorithm gods. You know the drill. And be prepared because the Game of Thrones podcast returns. Me and Preston will be back to talk about the first episode of Night of the Seven Kingdoms and try our very best not to spoil it since we've seen the whole thing already. But yeah, hope you guys will join us for that. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I see you all next time. Have a good one.